What the hell is wrong with you? You trying to start something? Piss off, before I crack you in half.
Hark! Hark! Triton! Hark! Below! Bid our father, the Sea King, rise from the depths full, foul in his fury, black waves teeming with salt foam, to smother this young mouth with pungent slime, to choke ye, engorging your organs till ye turn blue and bloated with bilge and brine and can scream no more, only when he, crowned in cockle shells, with slithering tentacled tail and steaming beard, take up his fell befinned arm. His coral tongue trident screeches banshee-like in the tempest and plunges right through your gullet, bursting ye, a bulging blacker no more, but a blasted bloody film now, a nothing for the harpies and the souls of dead sailors to peck and claw and feed upon, only to be lapped up and swallowed by the infinite waters of the dread Emperor himself. Forgotten to any man, to any time, forgotten to any god or devil, forgotten even to the sea, for any stuff or part of Winslow, even any scantling of your soul, is Winslow no more, but is now itself the sea.
Hey guys, how are you all doing? If you enjoyed that intro and are at all interested about where it came from, it is from Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, which came out a couple years ago at this point, maybe 2018, starring Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. His most recent movie, Nosferatu, came out this year, which in my opinion was probably my favorite movie I've seen so far this year. If you're just kind of staring blankly at your screen, being like, what the hell are you talking about, Rofo, this video just started, it's because I'm uploading like 2 versions of the same video, one with the intro, one without, just in case, for some very stupid reason, this video gets a copyright strike. I don't care about demonetization. I don't make any real money off of these videos anyways, but I just don't want like the whole video to get taken down because I included 2 minutes of dialogue from a movie in the first 2 minutes of what is going to be probably a 25 to 30 minute video. Hopefully this will be an irrelevant little rant and we can just move on and we can talk about the build. So the original concept for this build was that I was going to use the Smith's Crypt axe and the anchor weapon. And my original plan was just like level up enough faith and intelligence to get the Smith's Crypt axe, and then I'll just dump everything else into vigor and strength so I can wield the anchor axe. And the whole idea for this was supposed to be like this drowned knight. If you read the item description of the rusted anchor, it talks about how the tarnished left on boats when they were exiled from the lands between. Or at least that's kind of what it implies, because it mentions that like only one boat was left behind. And so this was like a character who drowned either in one of those shipwrecks off of like Limgrave or Caelid that you kind of see like near Redmane Castle from like the dunes there. And that when the Tarnished were recalled to the lands between, this thing crawled out of the ocean in all of its disgusting eldritch horror. And so I kind of wanted to keep this theme of nautical weapons with the rusted anchor. And then I was thinking the Smith's Crypt axe was a good choice because I'd been kind of interested in that weapon. It has this like rusted metal texture to it, I guess. And a lot of the time in like naval warfare, they use like boarding axes and stuff like that. So I thought that would be a good weapon. But ultimately, as I kind of dwelled on this build more and more and gave it just like a lot more thought of how to make this work and how to make it more nautical themed, I kind of got the sense of like, okay, I want to cast the big bubble, right? I really want to go back to Great Oracular Bubble because I love that spell. And the only way I was going to be able to cast it was to wear 2 Source Heals, Radagon's for the strength, vigor, and endurance, and then Marika's for the intelligence and arcane. And then also the FP is nice too. But in getting Marika's Source Seal, I also got that 5 extra faith, and I was kind of looking at what other weapons I could use, and I happened upon the Gazing Finger, which the stat spread is like 20 intelligence, 14 faith, which is completely bizarre. And then it's a strength weapon on top of that, right? But it's such a weird alien weapon. And I kind of thought to myself, you know, this would be a really cool just kind of change up on this build. You know, I'm using this much faster Great Axe. Wouldn't it be cool to sometimes use a colossal weapon? And I really haven't used a lot of colossal weapons in this game. And it was using that colossal weapon that I was like, actually, this is the perfect weapon for this build. I'm going to devote like the next section of this video specifically to the Gazing Finger. But for now, I also wanted to mention that I ended up swapping out the Smith Script Axe for the Smith Script Spear. If you look at that thing, it's really just a harpoon. And I was like, okay, what better nautical themed weapon than a harpoon that you can just throw for free, practically. And then from there, I got even more mileage than I expected out of the Smith Script Harpoon, if you will. So yeah, this is pretty much the build. This is the Drowned at rune level 60 with plus 12 and plus 5 somber weapons. And it came together in like a very natural way, and probably my favorite way, which is all like lore and theme first. You let the theme and like the lore of your character inform which weapons you're gonna choose, and then you just play around to see what actually works. I'm not one of these people who are just gonna like pick a bad weapon and be like, this is the theme of the build, I'm doggedly sticking with it. Like I've seen a lot of sailor builds out there which are just like power stancing anchor builds, and that was never gonna be what I wanted with this build. I wanted to find something that worked really well, and like this combination of Smith Script Spear and Gazing Finger unexpectedly worked so much better than I could have possibly imagined. So really, really happy with how this all turned out. Alright, let's talk about the Gazing Finger. This is a stupid weapon. That doesn't make any sense. And I love it because it makes so little sense. If you read the item description of it, this is still the living creature Matir, Mother of Fingers. And when you do the Ash of War, you thrust Matir's face into the ground, which pisses them off. So they unleash a whole fuckload of like wave of energy because they're really angry about you shoving their face into the ground. What better weapon for this like terrible sea monstrosity than a living creature that is angry about being used as a weapon? If you look at the numbers for this build, and I'm talking about like the stat requirements and the scaling, it requires 20 strength, which is where it gets most of its physical scaling from, and then also requires 20 intelligence and 14 faith. Kind of a weird stat spread, but you can kind of see that it derives like most of its scaling from strength, and then a little bit from intelligence, and hardly anything from faith. But when you use the Ash of War, apparently this becomes a faith weapon, and it derives all of its Ash of War scaling from faith. Now I'm using it at such a low level, which is like I think what, plus 5 on this, that just the base damage of its Ash of War is more than enough. Like you really don't need any scaling with it. So for me, it really just goes back to being a strength and intelligence weapon, which is perfect because that's mostly what this build is, with just a couple other random stats here and there. What I really love about this weapon, other than its look and its general vibe and lore, is its moveset. Now the R1 Colossal moveset, pretty basic. Has a lot of hyper armor, pretty slow. I have a really hard time taking ripostes with this weapon because I will break somebody's shield, and the recovery on just the R1s is so long that I will often miss the window for the riposte. If anyone has any tips on how to, you know, cancel that recovery maybe so I can actually take some of these ripostes that I'm getting, please let me know. It's very frustrating. But the real star of the show, as I'm sure you've seen from most of these clips here, is the R2s. When I first killed Matir, which is a boss I just absolutely despise fighting, I got this weapon, and I was like, what a weird looking weapon this is. And then I tried out the moveset, and I'm like, cool, garbage weapon, weird stat spread, useless R2s that I'm never going to use. Like, nobody's ever going to touch this weapon. And then it was only when I actually started hitting people with the R2s that I was like, oh wait, this is actually, like, maybe the best moveset out there for colossal weapons. Like, I think the Sunflower Stock, or whatever it's called, has a similar R2, and now I'm, like, concocting builds in my head about trying to use that weapon too. But the R2s on this build have very fast hyper armor startup, and they also come out pretty quick. And the hyper armor that they have on these R2s is more than you might think. I'm poising through stuff like two-handed greatswords and two-handed curved greatswords. I think the only thing I wasn't able to actually hyper armor through was like a two-handed colossal sword. And I was like, you know what, that's fair. I probably shouldn't be able to do that just one-handed. You have to also understand that when I'm making these builds, I'm just looking for one-handed weapons because my other hand is always gonna be like occupied by a staff or some sort of casting tool. So having insane hyper armor on R2s with a one-handed weapon is insanely valuable to me. It could not pair better with like a mage with just a little bit of strength. And really, 20 strength isn't breaking the bank or anything. 20 strength gets you access to at least some of the ballistas. It gets you access to like a ton of the curved greatswords. There's a lot of stuff that's very, very useful to have for like 20 strength. Just most of the time, I'm not doing it because I'm dumping all of my points into like elemental damage stats for the most part. And then, as I'm sure you've seen from these clips so far, the Ash of War is absurd. It feels so good to burger flip people with a move that like has that wide of an area of damage. And I keep saying this, but it just fits so well with the whole build, which is that like what feels better as like this eldritch being than using like some piece of an alien to unleash this like giant wave of energy at your opponents. It's like one of the best get off me tools. I think Waves of Darkness is still significantly better in a lot of ways. I just think this is so much cooler and something you don't see that often. The other weapon I'm using is the Smith Script Spear. Spears in this game typically aren't that great. This is also not that great, but it's very fun thematically for this build and is a very light chase down weapon. The Smith Script Spear weighs 3 Miyazakis. It's a very, very light weapon considering that it's still a full-fledged spear. As you all know, the whole purpose of Smith Script weapons is yeeting them at people. And this just like throws like a harpoon. At one point I put Spectral Lance on it, so I could either throw with my R2s or use the Ash of War, throw with your R2s. I really don't use the Ash of War on this that much. I think I ended up putting Piercing Fang on this, which I don't really know why I did, because the range of Piercing Fang is about the same range as like, or effective range as the Smith Script R2s. So I just don't really use the Ash of War that much. I'm mostly just throwing spears at folks. That's something worth talking about here, which is the range of the Smith Script Spear is probably a little shorter than you'd think. I think they did a smart thing by making all the Smith Script weapons have like medium range. What I mean is at a certain range, the weapon will have a damage drop off that is so significant that it will do like throwing dagger damage, even though you might have hit them with a spear. Medium range, they do like the proper amount of damage and pretty decent damage at that. But what got me super excited about the Smith Script Spear was in Seamless and riding around on Torrent. For most attacks while on Torrent kind of slows down a little bit while you do whatever you're doing, right? If you're casting a spell, like Torrent slows down to a little trot so you can cast your spell, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but like Torrent will slow down to do something like that. Or if you're like shooting a bow, Torrent will slow down, which makes chasing people on horseback kind of annoying. With the Smith Script weapons, at least for the spear and I know the axe, Torrent just like keeps up a full sprint. And so you'll go on these like tarnished hunts where you'll be like chasing down the party and throwing a spear at their Torrent, knocking them off their steed, and then like smacking them on the head while they're still on the ground. There's something about this act that like awakens something inside of me. Like I've had these like memories stored in the DNA that have been passed down from my caveman ancestors. There's this primordial desire to like hunt down my prey and my foes, fueled only by the thrill of the hunt. It's such a good feeling in this game, and it's something that I feel like we're robbed of from the base game. Instinctual memories aside, I cannot recommend enough getting yourself a Smith Script weapon and then throwing it at your opponents while chasing them on horseback. And thanks to the most recent patch for Seamless Co-op, any hits the Torrent basically knocks their rider off immediately. I will continue to kneel at the altar of Invasions and Luke Yui, who has found the beauty of Invasions after making the seamless co-op mod. One cool little feature of the knockdown off of Torrent is that you can actually take a riposte from your opponents, much in the same way you can knock down like the Knights Cavalry from their horses, or other just like mounted knights, or like the Kaiden warriors. If you knock them down, you can take ripostes off of them. You can do the same with players. It's just very inconsistent. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sometimes when I think I'm gonna take the riposte, I just smack them on the head, and other times I think I'm just gonna smack them on the head and I take the riposte. So I'll definitely take it when I can get it. It's just kind of inconsistent. I think it's great that Luke Yui put this in Seamless, though. What a great feeling that is. Like, off the heels of like knocking someone down on the horse, you get to come up on them and like plunge a spear through their chest. If you've played DS2 PvP and ever landed a parry, you get this animation where your opponent like sits their ass down for a second, maybe like 5 seconds, and this feels very, very similar to that, although a lot easier to land than a parry. But yeah, just wanted to mention that because it's something that can happen, just not consistent enough for it to like always happen. And I guess we should talk about the spells that I'm casting, because this is the Age of Mage. Now, they're very secondary to like the overall build, but there are a couple things I guess I would highlight here. The first is, of course, Great Oracular Bubble. What a spell, man. The tried and true classic of Great Oracular Bubble into Gravity Well to pull them back into the big exploding bubble is a pretty classic spell combo that I still like to use. It works about like 50% of the time. Most of the time, though, the Oracular Bubble just kind of like hangs out as this big, scary deterrent, and I can chase people down and throw spears at them while it just kind of follows them around menacingly. I'm very annoyed, peeved even, that they made Great Oracular Bubble, which requires intelligence and then also arcane, and then added a whole bunch of finger sorceries whose staff requires intelligence and arcane, and then made none of those spells require arcane. What are we doing? What are we doing, guys? Anyways, I don't really have any DLC spells on this build. I was trying to go for like ocean themed stuff, so I put Glintstone Arc on here because it makes a little whooshing noise like a wave when you cast it. That's legitimately the reason I put it on this build, man. Of course, I put Night Maiden's Mist because you know what else is at the bottom of the ocean? Noxious gases. What else do I have on here? I have Shatter Earth, which is actually kind of fun. Hyper Armor on it is a little bit slow, but once it gets up and it starts drilling, you can just drill people in the face with it. I highly recommend just like hold casting it into somebody who's trying to like swing a katana at you, and using it that way rather than how I see a lot of folks use it, which is like a worse version of Gavel of Haima. It just doesn't do as well as Gavel of Haima, so why use it like that? It's a little bit niche and not nearly as useful as something like, of course, Gavel of Haima, but also Carrion Greatsword or Adula's Moonblade. But it has its place, which is a fun little mix-up with a big drill. So that's on the build as well. I think the only other thing on here of note is Rancor Call, because I just have the stat recs for it, and it's fun to cast floaty little hexes. More on that in a video in the future, but Rancor Call is just an okay spell to just kind of throw out there to be like, look, I'm really spooky. As promised, because this is the Age of Mage, I'm going to do a little bit of a lore discussion. Lately, I've been consuming a ton of media about the ocean and like sailing, right? If you look at my Steam wishlist right now, it's all like these sailing simulator games. I recently went back and watched the Pirates trilogy, which is still kind of a classic. And then I have been reading a lot of books lately about the ocean. I don't know if any of you would remember, but in 2003, a movie came out called Master and Commander, starring Russell Crowe. And it came out like the same year as like one of the Lord of the Rings movies, so it just got like none of the attention, and I think got nominated for like a ton of Oscars, but won like maybe 2 of them, because Lord of the Rings just like swept everything up. And it didn't do great at the box office either, which is a shame because it is a phenomenal movie. It is a movie based on a series of like 20 books about a couple of characters, fictional characters during the Napoleonic Wars. So that's like 19th century British sailors. And I've read about like 10 of those books in like this 25 book series. And it's funny, it was written in this era that I think was like around the era of like Thatcher in Britain. So everybody's like very proud of, the British naval victories. I think this is like one of the few times in history when the British talking today can still claim the moral high ground because they're fighting the French. And I like that a lot. And then about like a month ago, I saw Nosferatu, which reminded me how much I liked The Lighthouse, which I think is like 75 to 80% of like my favorite movie. I just don't really like the last section of it all that much, but the entire vibe and themes of that movie I absolutely adore. And just games about the sea have always kind of fascinated me a lot. My favorite series growing up was the Assassin's Creed series, because they made like the first 4 games I think were all pretty good. They still make the occasional good Assassin's Creed game. They're just like a very different vibe than where the series started. But I think a lot of people can kind of agree that Black Flag was probably like the best Assassin's Creed game that they made. Cue the comments that Reddit loves to make about, it's a great pirate game, but not a great Assassin's Creed game. Shut up, bozo. It was also a great Assassin's Creed game. Like, the entire plot of the game is how Edward is, like, understanding, like, what it means to be an assassin. Like, to be part of that creed. And I'm not one of these big Assassin's Creed lore nerds, because, honestly, after the 3rd game, they screwed up the main storyline. But whatever. It's a great Assassin's Creed game too, and just like Reddit loves to repeat things ad nauseum because that entire platform incentivizes the same opinions to rise to the top. Like, it incentivizes you to say the things that you know is popular with the group so that they all give you little internet points. It's the same reason why, anytime you discuss Dark Souls 2, they're like, Dark Souls 2 is a great game, just not a good Souls game. Shut the fuck up, you fucking nerds. Anyways, what were we talking about? The sea. I love the sea, man. You know who doesn't seem to like the sea? Is Hidetaka Miyazaki. You might think that's an insane statement, right? You're like, oh, Bloodborne's, the whole DLC is about the sea. Okay, so we've had like 10 years of Souls games, right? And one level in one DLC has a level that is adjacent to the sea. Like, are we really going to be like, oh, Miyazaki loves the sea? I don't think he likes the sea. I think he likes lakes. I think he likes rivers. Sekiro's all about lakes and rivers. Elden Ring's all about lakes and rivers. Dark Souls 1 has tons of lakes and rivers, and Dark Souls 3 doesn't really have any of those, now that I think about it. Dark Souls 3 is just castles. But the one Souls game with like an actual like couple of sea-oriented levels is like the one Souls game Miyazaki didn't direct. I'm talking about Dark Souls 2 with No Man's Wharf, the Lost Bastille. Forest of Fallen Giants even sits on the ledge of a cliff overlooking the sea with the sea directly below it. Majula's on the sea. Like, the whole game takes place on the sea. And even the big themes of that game are like the giants. We like cross the sea to fight the giants, and the giants cross the sea back to come fight us. And they brought all these big ships with big giants on them, right? Like, the game is entrenched in the ocean. And then all of the other Miyazaki games are like, we don't give a shit about the ocean, man. They don't even mention the ocean when it comes to like the Tarnished leaving. Like, they don't even mention how the Tarnished all left. They're just like, they got banished. All the ocean is in Elden Ring is just like this barrier to the outside world. And you're like, oh, what else is happening in the outside world? Maybe I'm interested. No, we're just going to talk about outer space, other dimensions. We'll go to the land of the dead before we go to anywhere else that even remotely touches the ocean. Okay, maybe I'm over-exaggerating here. But it is interesting to me how it seems like previously there was more to do with the ocean in Elden Ring that made it into the base game. You see wrecked ships off the coasts of Caelid and Limgrave. The original intro was supposed to be that you wash up on the shore of the beach. Instead, they cut all that and made it so that you show up on this like chapel that's super, super high up on a cliffside and fight the Grafted Scion. I don't know if you all remember, but in one of the earliest leaks that we got about Elden Ring, had this line of dialogue about like the Tarnish crossing the Sea of Fog. And then when you actually play the game, there's no mention of the Sea of Fog. It's just like a distant land. And it's funny because you look at the map of Elden Ring and there's so much water in it. There's this giant crater in the middle of the lands between. And I understand why there's a giant crater. There's been a lot of movement in the lands between. It seems like basically the whole Hornset civilization used to be here before it got fucking banished to the Shadow Realm, quite literally. It also seems like Farum Azula used to be located in the middle where this crater is now, before it got carried off by a big tornado. But what's in the middle now? Nothing. It's just like a void. I think just the sea just represents a giant void to Miyazaki and From Software. Like, things just kind of emerge from it. But like, what's going on in it, we really don't care. It's not a medium for transportation. It doesn't house anything. It is simply a barrier of which we know nothing below, on, above, only just on what's the other side of this great barrier that is the sea. And I think that's unfortunate, because I freaking love the sea, man. Like, my dream is like a Pirate Souls game. And like, sea monsters are really cool, and I think there's like so much like lore to the sea, and so much like superstition. Even while reading these like Master and Commander books, these guys are like, they're kind of like in the Enlightenment phase, where they're all like, some of them, one of the main characters is a naturalist and a scientist, and he's trying to understand why all of these like sailors are so ridiculously superstitious. And it's because the sea is this mysterious, unknowable place to them. They make their whole lives and careers on it, but they're also completely at its whim. And I think like this, a Souls-like pirate game steeped in the mystique and lore of the ocean would just go absolutely crazy. I think if FromSoft ever wanted to make a Bloodborne sequel, which thankfully Bluepoint was not actually working on, thank God. I'm not a big fan of Bluepoint, but that's for another time. But I think if FromSoft ever wanted to make a Bloodborne sequel, the coast and around the ocean is the place to make it. I think my favorite level, and a lot of people's favorite levels from Bloodborne, were the fishing hamlet. And if you look at a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's work, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend because a lot of it's not very good, but a lot of it is set on the coast. And if you look around, I think people are pretty hungry for like more actual Eldritch horror. One of the most popular indie games of the last couple of years was Dredge. Maybe I'm making that up. Maybe it wasn't the most popular, but it got a lot of coverage, and I feel like a lot of people wanted to talk about it. And it was a pretty fun game that I did enjoy, but it was essentially an Eldritch fishing game. You're like among sea monsters, and you're this tiny little ship that is suffering from, madness, and you're also scared of what's in the water while you're fishing. One of the ideas that I've been kicking around my head for a very long time was like a 20th century diver Souls-like. That sounds really stupid, but like instead of suits of armor, you're wearing like these old-fashioned diving suits, and it functions more like Armored Core, where you're like upgrading pieces of your diving suit, but you still have like a fashion Souls element to it. And the whole thing takes place underwater because the deep sea scares the shit out of me, and I think that would be awesome. But anyways, these are kind of all of my inspirations for making this nautical-themed character. If Elden Ring doesn't really want to talk about the sea and doesn't want the character to deal with the sea at all, I'll bring the sea to the other hosts in seamless co-op.
It's a sailing time.
So that's about all I have to say about The Drowned. Very, very fun build, made in the way that I really love making these builds, but not nearly as mage-focused as some of the other stuff that I have planned. I'm hoping to get a lot more into multicasting with the Staff of the Great Beyond for the next couple of builds that I'm making. However, I've yet to actually do any invasions with those, so we shall see how those go. I hope you've all been liking this schedule of like doing a full-fledged build video and then more of like a clip dump video of like clips that I found really fun or invasions that I really liked. I'm hoping to keep that up, but it's really like schedule dependent, just on like how much time I have to make videos, which is a lot more these days, but also like whether or not these builds are working. I could easily foresee a huge snag where like I make a build, doesn't really work the way I want it to. I keep trying to tweak it, it's just not working. And then I get up to my like deadline of when I want to start making this video and I have no real clips to make a video out of. So hopefully I'll keep to my schedule, but it is relying pretty much entirely on success of my build creating skills. But anyways, that's all from you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.